Our first panel is sponsored by District Capital Detroit and Gallagher. I'd like to introduce you to, and I'll alphabetically be fine, Diane Bataya, Village Green. Diane oversees Village Green Holding, and the company operates a portfolio comprised of more than 43,000 apartments throughout the country. Diane, the valuation of Village Green is currently at approximately $10 billion. I read about her in Cranes a couple months ago, and she's at a stage in her career where she's singularly focused on leadership, helping support the next generation, and is very interested in relationship development. So I thought it would be a perfect opportunity for us to meet her today. Let's welcome Diane Bataya. Michael Ferlito is a partner of Ferlito Group, which is a parent company of several real estate development, investment management, and construction companies that has been family-owned and operated since 1980. Michael leads development in residential, multifamily, industrial, and self-storage facilities in Metro Detroit and Florida. Michael? Next up is Dan Kilberg. The current number of units insured across his team's practice is more than 200,000. Completely dedicating his time to this area allows him to specialize in the analysis of unique exposures and risks found in real estate, habitational, commercial, industrial, mixed use. Let's welcome to the stage Dan Kilberg. Kevin Kovacevic of District Capital Detroit. Kevin has more than 20 years experience as a mortgage banking professional and as a commercial real estate developer and owner himself. He's helped build a successful multifamily portfolio currently with more than 5,000 units, and a fellow wake surfing enthusiast, Mr. Kevin Kovacevic. And last but not least is Randy Wertheimer, President and CEO of Hunter Pasture Homes, with more than 20 years of experience as a home builder and developer. Randy and his team have built more than 1,000 homes and condominiums across 20 different communities throughout Southeast Michigan. Projects include South Lyon, Northville Downs, Ann Arbor, Bloomfield Hills, Lake Orion, Detroit, and soon to be the Godfrey Hotel in Corktown, really going to change the landscape here in the city. I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Randy Wertheimer. And a man that needs really no introduction to the commercial real estate and business community in Metro Detroit, someone that's happily served as a moderator for several panel events that we've done in the past. And my friend, Mr. R.J. King, editor, D Business Magazine.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Multifamily is an industry I've long covered. I was a business writer for the Detroit News from 1990 to 06, and then left after the Super Bowl, basically, and joined up with Our Detroit, and we launched D-Business in September of 06. And beyond the magazine, we have D-Business Daily News, Tech and Mobility News, and then an annual publication called Detroit 500. So what I thought we'd do to get things started, and we'll start with Diane, and just take a couple of minutes for each of the panelists to introduce themselves and describe their business real quick, and then we'll get into the questions. So Diane?
Good morning. My name is Diane Bataya. I am currently the CEO of Village Green Holding. We're comprised of two operating companies. One is the management company. The other is a firm called Greenworks Studio, which is essentially a digital advertising and interior design firm. It's a vertically integrated company. We're 100 years old, dating back to 1919 when we started out as a single-family home builder and evolved into the multifamily space in the 1960s. Ultimately, we have evolved today into just a pure third-party operator. My career at Village Green began back in May 1980, well before child labor laws were enacted. And so I did elevate through the company and held multiple positions, some on the apartment management side, development, construction, market research, all the way through the asset side of the business, and then ultimately landed in the CEO spot overseeing the current companies. We have about 43,000 units that we operate for approximately 70 different owners throughout the country. We extend as far northeast as Rhode Island and as far southwest as Arizona. Predominantly, we are Midwest operators.
Michael?
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Ferlito. I'm the president of the Ferlito Group. We're a family-owned and operated business that my father started 40 years ago. We focus on self-storage, 55-plus communities, apartments, mixed use, co-working space, and various other things that we do in the family. We primarily focus in Southeast Michigan, building 50 to 150 unit apartment buildings. And in Florida, we're doing self-storage in Tampa and in North Fort Myers.
Dan, you're next.
I'm Dan Kilberg with Gallagher. I've been with Gallagher for about 16 years now. I went to school for insurance, oddly enough. I'm not going to give the speech that Derek gave in the beginning of slang and insurance, but I focus in real estate. I'm the managing director for our Midwest practice. I have clients all over the country, but primarily domiciled here. We insure roughly 220,000 units nationwide, and then as a result of that, a lot of private equity and any type of real estate, really. We've got a great team built out to handle it over the years, and we're excited to be here today.
Kevin.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Derek. This is a great event. Thanks for putting this on. My name is Kevin Kovacevic. I own District Capital. We're a relatively newer firm in town, 3-year-old shop in Detroit. We're a mortgage banking firm that specializes in the entire capital stack for every commercial property's debt financing needs. We also provide equity, so we're doing construction financing, bridge financing, permanent debt, bridge, mezzanine debt, pref equity, the entire stack. I also run a multifamily company that has been buying multifamily as is and new ground-up construction, about 5,000 units now, primarily in the Midwest, but we've recently sold off some Midwest assets and moved down to Atlanta and out west to Seattle and Salt Lake. So I'm kind of doing both sides of with the equity and on the debt side.
Okay, great. Randy, and I think probably the most famous project you have right now is that Godfrey Hotel, which is at Michigan and 8th Street, just down the street from the Ford train station.
Correct. Good morning, everybody. Randy Wertheimer, CEO of Hunter Pasture. We are a residential developer, also with mixed use. We do for sale and for rent multifamily development. We've got about 2,000 units at some form of development, about half under construction or starting, another half starting in the next year. As RJ mentioned, we have what we think is going to be a tremendous hotel that will open 11 months from now in Corktown that we hope checks every box that Metro Detroit needs, from beautiful large ballrooms to rooftop lounge, great ground floor restaurant. But yeah, residential development for sale and for rent. And Derek, this is an amazing event that you put together. Great turnout.
Well, let's jump right into it. And, the obvious one is, how is supply chain and labor constraints affecting development and construction? Obviously, prices are going up across the board, pretty much.
You want me to take that first swing?
You could start. It's probably the same answer.
Well, I think everyone knows it's extremely challenging. I would say the first part of this year was probably the most challenging, with the surge and inflation of bids coming across from all the different trades and all different trade types. We have seen it start leveling off, even though some like concrete, some major trucking, even though everything needs trucking, but some major site equipment that needs a ton of diesel, they're definitely still surging their pricing. But it's been very challenging, and it's been very frustrating for a lot of developers because, they're budgeting something 6 months ago. Well, 6 months later, it's up by 30%. They can't get financing, even though I think Kevin over there can definitely help them out. They can't get financing, and then their numbers are blowing up and the project's blowing up. So it's like, what do you do at that point? There's such a demand for housing and development right now, and it's like, do you want to shelve your project because of the construction costs? It's very disheartening, but we do see the light at the end of the tunnel. And we believe the spring, things will actually start coming down. If you follow the commodity prices, I think lumber is at $600 compared to 6 months ago is at $1,100. So we see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, whatever project you're working on, it takes a year to 2 years to break ground once you identify a location that you want to develop. And during that last year or two, costs have skyrocketed at a pace that has never been seen. A general contractor shared a story with me that from 2000 to 2020, costs went up 1 to 3% every year like clockwork, including 2008 and 2009. From January 1st, 21 to the end of September 21, costs went up 15%. I mean, you couldn't even imagine you're working on a project and you assume it costs X. You know, you're ready to break ground and it's 15, 20% more than you had projected. So you've got to have a great general contractor who's able to really, you know, guide you through this turbulent market. Fortunately, the housing industry, the rental and the for sale side of the housing industry has been excellent during that time, and you are able to pass some of that on to your customer. But at some point, that doesn't work. You can't continue to pass that cost on. So I do agree with Michael that it's stabilizing. I'm not sure that I agree it's going down. I happen to think that we have a new normal, which isn't the greatest news, but I think that it's a fact. I don't know that construction costs will go down, but I do believe they are stabilizing and will not continue to go up at this pace.
Anybody else?
Well, from an operator's perspective, I could kind of talk about this from two different perspectives. Number one, as it relates to residents, this upward inflation of rents, I think, is really a problem. The supply-demand imbalance continues to be an issue throughout the country, and even in Metro Detroit, where we've actually seen probably higher increases in rent than other markets. Texas is another example of that. Double-digit lease trade-out rates. I think it's that pressure on the renter is absolutely increasing, and affordable housing continues to be a challenge, in the country. So I think everything that's going on with respect to supply constraints is adding to that pressure and to that burden. From an MRO perspective, as an operator, that's challenging because you have to turn units, you have to take care of the properties. How we've solved that problem is through national procurement relationships. With scale, you can do that, right? You can get into a partnership with HD Supply or Ferguson or Sherwin-Williams and get preferential treatment, which we've seen work very well. When no one could get paint, we made a call, we were able to get paint. So I think that's the solution from an MRO perspective. If you're a small operator or owner-operator, align yourself with other operators. There's power in numbers. We're not competing against one another. We should help each other. So I think from the standpoint of just rental rate and upward pressure, if you're a developer and an owner, you're like, yes, right? If you're an operator or renter, it becomes challenging. So I think there's got to be a balance there. So what we've done to sort of moderate that is to have a cap on existing residents, because the best, customer is the one you currently have. So to keep that resident in place, it's lower turnover and what have you. We do discuss that with our owner partners, and how do we do that while still driving NOI and being very sensitive to their needs. And then new rentals coming in the doors where you really get the high dollar. So that's, from our perspective as an operator, the pluses and minuses of the environment that we're currently in.
Well, one thing to combat inflation is to raise interest rates, which the Federal Reserve has done. They've been a little late to the game on it, and they've self-admitted that. But Kevin, how does that affect lending and getting the money to the right places at the right time so these projects can continue?
Sure. Look, the recent rise in treasuries and the market overall, it's getting back to what's probably more of a normal. We've enjoyed this free money for way too long, and so we're starting to see more of a normal move to where the treasury probably should be. How it's going to affect, in my opinion, some of the deals that are out there. Like, look, there's a ton of liquidity in the marketplace. Everyone knows that everyone's flush, every company's flush, every private equity shop has raised billions of dollars. So there's money on the sidelines, okay? So that money on the sidelines is going to continue to outpace this interest rate environment. So a lot of people talk about cap rates, right? A lot of calls that I get are, why aren't cap rates going up with the treasury? Well, because cap rates and treasury don't move in lockstep, especially the multifamily market. Multifamily market is unique in the sense that you have 1-year leases, and so it's a great hedge against inflation. So every year you get to reset that. There are a lot of lease trade-outs that are in the double digits, high double digits, 20% lease trade outs in some of these instances because the rents haven't been moved in a long time. So what we're seeing is that in the multifamily space, the GSEs, Fannie, Freddie, HUD, they're always going to be there. There's tons of liquidity in the marketplace. It's just not at these ridiculously low levels, so you're not going to be able to borrow at 3.25 anymore. You're not going to be able to borrow at 3.5. That will put some pressure on cap rates to move up, but in the Midwest, we've got a already higher than normal cap rate than the rest of the world, the rest of the country. The coasts are always in the 2s and 3s. The southeastern Smile States are in the 3s. You know, we're starting to move up a little bit. There'll be some upward movement in cap rates, not much. But overall, the liquidity's there. Every single life insurance company we deal with, every single lender has money. There's no shortage of dollars. It's just a matter of where that new pricing comes in, and that's going to affect, you know, overall where you buy your deal, how you project your pro forma going forward. I know it's affecting the construction side of the business because, you know, these banks, I've been giving them grief for years about using exit stress analyses and tests of high interest rates that'll never happen. Well, we're kind of there now, and you know, we're at a point where your exit takeout, you go to build something, and 3 years from now when it's done and it's stabilized, you thought your interest rate was going to be 3.5, 4. Well, it's more like 4.5, 5, or 5.25, or maybe 5.5 down the road. Can your deal sustain that type of blow? And so it's affecting every single deal in a way, but it's not moving the needle to where the deals aren't getting done. Deals are still getting done. Don't get me wrong. Because there's so much money that's out there, you're going to see deals continue to trade, albeit at a slower pace. Some of the deals that we've been buying and looking at and bidding on, 6 months ago, it was 20 bids above ask. And now it's 1 or 2 bids near ask, and they're calling you back because you're within 5 or 10% saying, hey, tighten up a little bit. So deals are still happening, just not at the torrid pace that they were.
Great, thank you. Thank you. On the insurance side, Dan, I was speaking with somebody the other day from Haggerty, and they were saying, well, the only time people think about insurance is when they actually sign up for it or when they have to go use it. But in the multifamily sector, what's going on in the insurance sector?
I mean, the supply and demand issue is, you know, at the end of the day, causing the same issues as insurance. Insurance companies are seeing what they're paying in claims to rebuild and putting a lot of pressure on the valuation that people are insuring for. I mean, it's a back and forth battle always, but we're seeing the claims come in double what they've used to be insured for. So we're seeing a lot of pressure there. I mean, we're a line item on the expense list that used to be, you know, somewhere down the line a little bit. But as everybody knows that's in the space, the multifamily insurance market is very tough right now. The Midwest is doing a little better, but, you know, down south in Florida and on the Gulf Coast, it's pretty havoc. I mean, there's been programs that have gotten out or disbanded that were helping drive down price, and one of the bigger players in Florida lost one of their equity partners, and it's caused havoc. I mean, I've seen deals just like Randy was saying with, you know, a year ago we pro forma'd this deal. I've had deals we pro forma'd through the insurance company, and 40 days later it's changed. That's how rapid it's been. So we're getting a lot of pressure to the 15% of increase in valuation, which is a rateable factor, and I'm going to compound that on rates going up. It's been pretty tough.
Great. One thing that's always interested me is multifamily. People think apartments. And some of these apartment communities, more and more, you're seeing a slice of those apartments become condominiums. Several examples of that across the region and obviously around the country. Diane and anybody else can jump on it. How do you sort of balance that kind of a market in a multifamily community?
We actually have that scenario in Arizona where there's a combination of condo. It actually was a fractured deal that sort of went sideways, and now it's being operated as both, you know, rental apartments and condominiums. The challenge comes in negotiating with the homeowners association and agreeing upon the use of amenities and services, right? This attitude of NIMBYism does exist. We're better than them, and we don't want, you know, them sharing our clubhouse space. So that sort of thing occurs. We don't see it elsewhere in the country today in terms of what we're operating, but I'm sure it does exist. We did operate a property like that in the Detroit metro area, but our portfolio is predominantly rental. But in that situation, it's really just a matter of, again, relationship building, which is kind of coincidental with the topic of today that Derek's brought everyone together on. And it is really forging those relationships with the homeowner association officers, agreeing upon sort of reciprocal use and what is and is not allowed, and I think responsibility. So if they see that you are representing those that are renting in a manner that is responsible and sensitive to the homeowner's needs, we tend to balance it that way. And obviously a lot of it's perception of your neighbors. But it is challenging, and I wouldn't recommend it. Let me just say that. Either do one or the other. Blending the two is generally complicated and problematic.
Anybody else on that one?
That was a really eloquent way of saying that. I would have said, just run away. It's an absolute nightmare. It's a pain in the ass. The financing's tougher. There's so many layers. There's so many apartments out there. If you're an apartment investor, like, just buy an apartment building. Fractured condos are a result of the 2008 housing crisis, when we decided to convert all these apartments into houses because there was free money and people were buying them. And that market is dry. No one wants to buy an apartment unit to call it a condo. So, run away and decondo them and turn them back into apartments.
That's why you're here, to balance my overly, professional responses.
I think another challenge is
I worry more about social media than you do, apparently.
I think the other challenge, similar topic, but is short-term rental on top of apartments. I think a lot of operators that have a lot of apartment buildings in Michigan are using 10% of their units for short-term rentals, and it's creating a lot of issues. Diane, can you speak to that?
100%. That is a huge problem. And again, I feel personally, first of all, the leases restrict it. So from a legal perspective, you are not allowed to do it. Although I know that owner-developers are looking at ways to leverage that in a way that is not going to affect the other people living in the building with the transient nature of where you have these short-term rentals. Where we've seen it, it's always created problems because the renter or the leaseholder of that unit doesn't tend to run that person coming in for a day or a week through the gauntlet of background check, right? So you do have problems where we've seen it, and I wouldn't. Again, I discourage it, but understand that it can be a revenue opportunity for owners. So if done right, if controlled, if the application process is managed through the office as opposed to through that leaseholder, I think you can make it work. Otherwise, it becomes the wild, wild west where we've seen it get out of control. You end up having issues with, honestly, I can say drug trafficking. We had a situation in Cleveland, downtown Cleveland, where renters were doing this, and it became just an absolute nightmare and a media circus when a person in a unit actually jumped out of their window and killed themselves in the middle of the flats. And so that was a B&B, renter. So that's the sort of nightmare that you can get into if you do not control it. I still think it's out there. You can see it. Again, there's got to be a way to do it that protects the property, protects the other residents in the building and the operator. But how it's been done so far, where there have been no rules or restrictions around it, has been problematic. And residents within that building who don't like it are complaining to the municipalities, and then you're being cited for allowing something that's not legally allowed. So I think there will come a time where there'll be some way to manage it, because the push is still there. And I think where it does work, where we've seen it work, are in senior buildings, where you have snowbirds that are living in Florida or someplace warm in 6 months out of the year, and they're renting for a year. And in those situations, we've managed it extremely well, where they go through the background check and they are qualified and approved. They're allowed to sort of sublet their unit for 6 months while they're away, but they own it and they're responsible for it. And there's insurance associated with it. So I think there's a way to do it, control it, but don't, you can't ignore the fact that it exists.
That was going to be my point, Diane, is the insurance companies want nothing to do with short-term rentals for all the reasons you just listed. I mean, they're on the hook for that stuff when that happens, and they don't like to be on the hook when they're not supposed to be. They will run. I've had to fight claims over short-term rentals having losses that insurance companies did not want to pay. And it just creates a bigger problem, like Kevin said.
We actually have an asset in urban Atlanta where tenants are fabricating, whether it be the application process, all parts of the process, just to get the unit, only for the sole purpose of turning it into an Airbnb that they never even occupy. So it turns into, it's a huge problem down in Atlanta and other southeastern states where you've got this urban mentality of everyone wants to live there. So it brings in a lot of weekend and nighttime and activities because there's lots of things going on. So people just get in, get their unit, and because of the way that the laws work down there with respect to foreclosure, not foreclosure, but eviction, it's a long process. So they can get in. If they get in, they got a 6, 7, 9 month window of just crushing the Airbnbs, and then it kills your occupancy because people look at it and say, like, this is all of a sudden a frat house, and we don't want to be there, and it's a nightmare. So I say stay away from that, too.
If you control it, that's the problem.
Yes.
You have residents in the apartments that do their own thing, and unless you're watching it, watching those listings
gotta police
and
it. It's-
controlling, you've got to police
it's
it.
tough.
Absolutely.
We leased a building downtown to a short-term rental company, and they manage everything. It's not mixed or blended in with our other apartment portfolio, but it's just one building, about 45 units, and they handle everything. And it's a publicly traded company. That's the only way we would ever do it again, if it's a reputable brand, not having someone lease out their unit. It's just there's no quality control.
Inflation, supply chain difficulties are all affecting what multifamily developers and owners can charge for rent. Randy, is there a ceiling out there in terms of where rents can get to, or how do you balance everything?
So our biggest hedge against, RJ, what you just described, is only select developments in A-plus locations. If you're selecting a development in an A-plus location that is highly desirable, for example, like a Birmingham, there is a little more latitude on what you're able to charge for rents. If you're in a location where $2 a foot is absolutely the maximum rent someone would pay, we try to stay away from those deals because you need to have flexibility and you need to be in a location with quality amenities that people are willing to pay for. The supply chain disruption is something that you now have to commit to significant contracts much farther ahead of schedule in what you would normally do when you're developing a building. Prior to even closing on a construction loan, we're making 7-figure commitments to certain suppliers just to lock in a price and get in their schedule to know that we're going to get this delivered and supplied on time. But our biggest hedge is really only selecting A-plus locations where there's a little flexibility on what we can charge and rent. If we can't, if we initially are at $250 a foot in a pro forma and we don't feel comfortable that we can get to $275, we're not going to develop that location. We're going to pass on that. And if we think that the 275 is the cap, we probably still would pass on it. So we might pro forma 250 because we think 3 to 5 years in, we're at $3 a foot or more. If we don't believe there's that type of rent opportunity in that location, that's to me, at least in our business, we want to stick to the high end.
Anybody else on rents and how that might be impacting occupancy?
From our portfolio, we're seeing a little bit of slowdown in terms of we've been really aggressively pushing rents, only because we felt that our market, from a face rent standpoint, compared to the other markets we're in, are extremely low. So you're all in rent of $1,100, $1,200, $1,300. When you have everyone's salaries are going up, everyone's wages are going up. The affordability factor is there. They can afford the bump. So we've been pushing it to where you can go to until you feel a little pressure. And so we're starting to see that pressure now. I think that combined with everything else that's going up for the consumer, the rent's going to be the first thing they pay. But at the end of the day, there is a threshold. And so our goal is to find that threshold, and that's going to be born in occupancy. So if you can, as long as your occupancy stays above 95, you can continue to push rents. And there's a supply and demand problem. I mean, obviously, you can't just go out and build 300-unit apartment complex right now and not have to charge over $2 a foot in rent. So if you've got a 1970s product with value-add component and you're only charging $110, well, you've got room to move because, let's face it, like the states that are in the southern portion of the country and the coast, people are paying like close to 50% of their wages in rent. I mean, we're still at 30% here. So not to say we're anywhere close to the, those cities, but people will dig deeper in their pockets. So we're trying to find that threshold of, okay, when is enough enough? And we're starting to feel that. We saw occupancy dip from 98, 99 to 96, 97. Okay, so we've got a little room left, but it'll all be borne out in occupancy to see where that shakes out, and you'll find it eventually.
I think we've all seen in the last few years how these multifamily projects are really almost micro cities in and of themselves with all the amenities that are provided. What are some of the new amenities that you guys are seeing that your tenants are asking for, or prospective tenants are asking for?
I think one of the items that we've included in everything we're doing now that 5 years ago, I would say a developer never thought of, is we're providing industrious or WeWork type work from home spaces in the development. Because even now, people are going back to work, there's more flexibility. Someone who still goes to the office may only go to the office 3 or 4 days a week and not 5. So we are putting state-of-the-art, beautiful work from home spaces in the development as part of our community space where people can leave their unit but not leave the building and still work from home. Being cooped up in your apartment all day is not something that people are excited about. They still, as you can see here with everybody here, people like human interaction. So the community amenities that we provide, that's something that in the last few years has been added that I would argue 5 years ago nobody ever thought about.
I would just add to the co-working side, we operate Bamboo in Detroit and Royal Oak, and the last, not with COVID, but the last couple of years, we've been getting a lot of calls from developers to manage their spaces for them, to add a brand to that space. And but I couldn't agree more with Randy. It's really blowing up.
What we've seen across the country, it's interesting. The pandemic, I think, has opened the door to different sorts of technology and more technology and interactive technology. So in exercise rooms where you used to just have your equipment set up, you now have to have the interactive, working out with someone on the screen sort of scenario. Smart home technology is also really important in certain markets. And, there was this theory that everyone didn't want to talk to a human through the pandemic, where everything had to be done, virtually or on an app. So that sort of, in the prop tech world, that led to lots of different sorts of apps, from leasing an apartment through kind of resident communication and submitting service requests and all those sorts of things. Where we are today is you actually have a need for both high tech and high touch. So the demand for having those relationships at the site and service techs on site and salespeople on site, it still exists, along with make it easy. If I don't want to talk to you, I want to be able to use an app. So we're actually seeing that. As it relates to outdoor spaces, that's become a much bigger focus, obviously driven by the pandemic. So we've seen that stick as well, where we're seeing much more grandiose, I'll call it, outdoor spaces, rooftop spaces with kind of movie theaters, grilling areas, places people, can come together and socialize outside. So the interior club rooms have become smaller, and the exterior spaces have actually become larger from our observation.
And before we turn it over to the audience for questions, we got about 10 minutes left, and anybody on the panel can respond. But what does multifamily look like 10 years from now?
I'll go first. I think multifamily has been and always will be the darling of the real estate sector. I mean, it's housing, and it depends on how population growth continues in our country. But we have a housing crisis, and that's not going to be fixed in 1, 2, 3 years. It's going to be 10 years. So I think 10 years from now, if I'm sitting up here, if Derek invites me, I'm going to be talking about the same thing. Rents are up, and things are great, because we just have a big problem here. And look at the housing prices. There's no starter homes anymore. Can you go buy a house in Madison Heights for $100,000? No, you're not even close. It's a problem. So until the government actually there's an intervention and they do something about it and they subsidize it, we're going to be sitting here 10 years from now talking about the same thing.
I just want to mention, Kevin touched on something that I think is an interesting topic, and I believe the first-time home buyer no longer exists. And the reason I say that is the price of construction and interest rates rising. When I graduated college and I bought my first condo for $120,000 25 years ago, that doesn't exist today. And so that first-time home buyer now has to be able to afford $300,000 or $400,000, and that first-time home buyer now is a renter for a longer period of time. And I think there's a lot of studies that have shown millennials prefer to rent longer for flexibility and other reasons. But I also believe there's an affordability issue that has forced people to rent longer, because I think that quote-unquote first-time home buyer buying a small home or condo for $100,000 to $150,000, maybe $200,000 doesn't really exist. And new construction home builders cannot build for that cost based on land cost, construction cost, and now interest rates rising. So I think that's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know what it looks like exactly 10 years from now, but I believe the first-time home buyer is a non-existent part of the process, and I think that person is a renter for a longer period.
I would have to agree with that. So we build subdivisions as well, and there's a twofold problem. Well, it's a lot more than that, but the city's restrictions in the building codes are so prohibitive for developers to come in and build these things. It's unbelievable. So the local and Michigan building codes need to change. And then the second thing is the shadow inventory. No one talks about Blackstone, BlackRock, and all these private equity companies buying $25, $30 billion a year in homes. I know developers down in Florida and Colorado that are developing 300-unit sites. One guy will come in, I'll take every house for your market and rent them all out. So, the supply, just not on the construction side, but it's actually the supply on existing inventory is being dried up. And unless those two changes, and then the federal government needs to do something to help with development, because, I see in 10 years where, it's impossible to build a market rate apartment building. So what does that do? That pushes everyone into government-sponsored housing and government-sponsored programs. And there's a huge diversion of income equality here that no one's touched on today. But that's also, how many apartments can we build that cost $2,500 a month to rent? There's a lot of headwinds here, and there's a lot to fix.
Yeah, and I don't think we're going to see the dysfunction in our government change in the next 10 years. So I think it's going to continue to be, that imbalance of supply demand is still going to be there 10 years from now. I like to focus on the demographic shift that we're seeing in the country, and that is a real thing that we need to be aware of, and that is going to impact our industry 5-10 years down the road. Aging of America, fewer people having children late. So you're going to see that barbell of, the older demographic that are renters by choice and the younger, what we like to call Zoomer market, who are, going to want smaller, more urban, more easy sort of rentals close to work. And I don't think we're going to ever 100% return to work. I think we're going to be living in a hybrid scenario whereby there's some of both. So I think it's the now normal. It's not the new normal. And I think we have to get used to that. And I think the last thing I'll say about demographic shift is that the growth in the population is migration, predominantly, not organic growth. And that's going to continue. So I think we have to be very sensitive to the needs and wants of other ethnic groups that maybe currently we're not thinking about. Asian, Latin, etc. And they have specific needs and different ways they look at housing. So I think we definitely need to study up those who haven't, look at those demographic patterns and what's coming, and get ahead of that in terms of what you're developing and the amenities and things of that nature. That's going to impact our industry, and I think it's going to look different 10 years from now, the stock that's going to be more desirable than perhaps today. I know that's a lot to unpack, but there's a lot going on, and I think it's going to affect us for a long time to come.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. Open it up for questions from the audience. Anybody have a question? I can keep going. Oh, go ahead, sir.
Just for Diane, it seemed like
not only you, but the entire panel was against short-term rentals. I know the Court of Appeals recently said that violated residential restrictions. Do you think that the industry is going to push to try and make that so that's not an investment anybody wants to be in anymore?
I think the hospitality industry ought to have a bigger role, and I think much to what Michael talked about, there are ways to do it that are the right ways to do it and make money and be profitable and not impact the value of the asset overall. So no, I don't think our industry as a whole is pushing for it. In fact, we're pushing against it and trying to bring more rules around it, let's say regulate it more in a manner that's going to protect the asset. That's the key here, and protect the residents.
Yes, sir. But there's, yeah.
Do you guys think we'll see another recession? Things have been too great for too long. Obviously, throughout the years, everyone said invest in real estate is the best thing that happened, and 2008 and 9 proved us wrong that real estate wasn't, the best market to be in. And things throughout 11 till today's been great. And do you guys anticipate seeing another recession in the real estate market?
I don't want to take this one, but I'll start. I don't see the same thing happening that happened in the Great Recession in 2008. We have liquidity. We have money. There's lots of it. There's a supply and demand problem. The fundamentals are there. So, we're not coming up to a cliff. Do I see there's headwinds? For sure. Do we see problems everywhere? I think it's going to be harder. I think deals aren't going to be flying off the shelf like they did at prices that made you scratch your head. I think you'll have a little bit of slowdown, pullback, but call it a recession. But in the real estate market, especially in multifamily, I just think there's too many things working in your favor this time versus what happened in 08. 08 was an absolute abomination. That was terrible, and what happened there, but that was a liquidity crisis. That was extending of credit that shouldn't have been extended. This is just a different beast. I think this is more of a traditional slowdown and not a cliff.
Yeah, I would agree with Kevin. I think it's more of a correction in the market. I mean, people just have to change how they're doing things to adapt to what's going on. But to his point, there's a lot of money on the streets. And unlike 08, when everybody was leveraged to the hilt.
Yeah, there's a bit, '08 isn't going to happen
No.
anytime soon. When you're having home buyers buy houses with zero down, that's not logical. And when something isn't logical, there's a huge issue. And so that's not happening today. I think there will be some ebbs and flows. Things are not going to stay as good as they've been. But '08, '09, I don't think we're going to see anytime soon.
Yeah, I concur, and I think we've learned enough to know how to balance it so that we avoid that. The actions of the Federal Reserve are a great example of moderating and preventing. So I think we've learned a lot from that. Will we see dips? Absolutely. I've seen 3 or 4, cycles, but, real estate's very cyclical. But that said, multifamily has always been solid. It's a necessity asset class. And, how it affects us is maybe you can't raise rents as much. Maybe occupancies dip a bit. But that's probably the safest asset class to be in, even in a downtime.
I agree with my colleagues here. I think it's going to be a different type of recession. Granted, it'll probably be labeled as a recession, but it's going to be different for people that are, upper income and higher, and then lower income. They are already in a recession. Someone making $30,000 a year can't afford $6 gas and $2,500 rents. So I think it's just going to be completely two-sided, and it's just going to be a slowdown. We see, it was the first, and I know you commented on construction costs going down. I really meant commodity prices, but last month was the first time we got a subcontractor call us and ask for work. So things are slowing down. We just don't see it. It's in the news everywhere, but we don't see it in person yet. But it is going to happen. And, you can't buy a home for $650,000 at 6% interest rates or 5.5% interest rates, and your mortgage payment doesn't say the same. So a lot of people can't afford that. So you're going to start seeing home pricing go down. It just has to happen.
Okay, and with that, it's 11 o'clock. So with that, please join me in thanking our panel, and we'll move on.
Thank you, RJ.